looks at iron deficiency and iron deficiency anemia in infants and children in low and middle income countries. So we're specifically looking at a population in a developing country. For my article, I was concentrating on reviewing literature that was considered recent evidence, so basically narrowing the focus on articles that were published from 2002 onwards, so over the last decade. And the whole idea was to understand the effects of iron deficiency and iron deficiency anemia on child development. So specifically looking at cognitive functions, looking at social emotional development and motor skills development in children, and what effects iron deficiency and iron deficiency anemia is having on that development. As well, it furthered this research by looking at preventative measures. So how can we, and what programs exist to intervene, basically the effects of ID and IDA on child development. The reason it was so critical is because the initial part of the review looks at how ID and IDA on child development sometimes has irreversible effects. So that's why concentrating on preventive measures is a way of sort of combating those effects. And some of the ones that we specifically looked at was iron supplementation, diet diversification, food fortification, and there's some other early and home interventions that sometimes are not always picked up. So those were also included in the review, so that's really interesting. As a fourth-year Bachelor of Health Sciences program student, I'm pursuing a global health specialization within my program. And during the third year of my specialization, I had the chance to partake in an embedded learning experience, for which I was spending about 4 months living in rural eastern Uganda, working with a local NGO, as well as living with a host family there. So I had a lot of neat and I want to say life-changing experiences, immersing myself in their culture and their daily struggles and what they enjoy, learning from the people in that environment, but also having a chance to observe global health in a sort of practical and real-life experience. One of the things that I experienced was the number of children, I guess you could see in the village, who were malnourished. And of course, this is evident because you can see their distended bellies. You can see that they might not look as physically fit as what we would expect a child of that age to look like in a developed part of the world. And this obviously struck me as something serious, something that I didn't understand, and I didn't know how exactly it fit or what to understand from it. When I returned back from my ELE, so for the second semester of my third year, I had the chance to complete a 3H03 project, which is an independent study project, basically. So I think this research basically came out of the interest that was sparked from my ELE in malnourishment, and then studying it from sort of that inquiry-based skills approach in 3H03. So I posed a question around malnourishment, and of course, in that inquiry process, we end up refining our questions and our topics, and that's how I ended up focusing on iron deficiency and iron deficiency anemia, which are considered to be the most prominent or the most widely occurring nutritional deficiencies in the world, so both in developed and developing countries. So I think that's where this interest was coming from, some of my own personal experiences, and then trying to incorporate a sort of inquiry-based approach to understanding the problem. The single most important thing that I think a reader can take away from the article is basically understanding that link between the effects of iron deficiency and iron deficiency anemia on child development, and the reason why those effects are important to the preventive measures. So when I was doing my research and when I was looking at those effects on child development, specifically in those three categories that I referred to earlier, basically cognitive, social, emotional, and motor development, what we find in the research and some of the literature is sometimes the effects of iron deficiency and iron deficiency anemia is irreversible. So even after treatment has been given to some children, the fallback of their development cannot always be caught up later on. And so what that is really saying, I think, to me and to even some of the researchers and other literature that's out there, is that there is a real need and a necessity for preventive measures over curative measures when it comes to iron deficiency and iron deficiency anemia. So I think as a reader, one of the most important things that can be taken away from that is how do we ensure, and especially in a low and middle income countries, so in developing countries where we need cost-effective, viable, effective preventive measures, how do we ensure that children are not falling behind in their child development due to iron deficiency and iron deficiency anemia? I think the research, my research article was concentrating a lot on making a connection between some of these effects of iron deficiency and iron deficiency anemia on child development and the viable approaches that we have to tackle these. And I think I was choosing a sort of a field or an area of interest in which we see preventative measures being of importance. So I think what my research article is doing is providing more evidence and support for that area of interest. I think the wider implication is that now that we have the evidence and the understanding for the link between basically the effects of iron deficiency and iron deficiency anemia and the reasons for preventive measures, we now have the opportunity to basically further research how are we going to implement some of the interventions and programs that are addressed in the article. So I think it's again providing some of that evidence to this sort of important link. And then from here, I think the further implications can be to look at what are some implementation strategies of the programs and interventions that were addressed in the article.